full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
And welcome to the weekly review here on Teachers Talk Radio. Spring has sprung in this part of the country, at least, so hopefully for you as well, as we head into the summer term with GCSEs for some of us less than a month away. We've got 3 stories for you today. We're talking about Sure Start, we're talking about book summary apps, and we're talking about Scouts learning to teach. So we're going to head straight into our first story. We are looking at a report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies here, and it talks about the impact of Sure Start on GCSE results. Particularly, they highlight its impact on disadvantaged students. So I'm going to come to Shaniqua first of all. Are there any surprises here for you that getting off to a good start in life and education it possibly improves your outcomes later on?
No, not at all. Not at all. It was a fascinating report, but it actually was quite clear. There's clear evidence. It tells us that if you provide a supportive environment to children in their early years and you kind of just invest in their futures, the results will be life-changing. And it's just such a shame because it was a huge blow for a generation of children. It just shows there's a clear evidence that those Sure Start centres actually improved life chances, which, wow, surprise, surprise.
Now I'm going to come to Catherine here. It is kind of a I guess we're looking back now at something that stopped. We're looking back positively on a decision that was made. Not on the decision that was made. We're looking back negatively on the decision that was made to stop some of this. What are your thoughts?
I used to go to the Sure Start centres actually when my son was a baby, and I know that I'm not the target demographic necessarily, but I found them so brilliant and so valuable. And you'd go twice a week, Fridays in particular. If you went to have the weigh-in with the baby, then you would get a cup of tea and a biscuit and just talk to other new mums, and there was always a friendly face. And we had did Makaton classes and all kinds of things were just available, and it was so brilliant. And I just felt that it's such a shame that those opportunities are not there. And I really agree with Shaniqua. It's impossible to disagree on the point that, if you put the environment in place and put the support and structures in place for families, because it is about educating the mums, and you'd sit there and you'd talk about stuff that you might not tell the health visitor, you'd mention it, because I think sometimes there's a feeling with the health visitor that if you admit something's going wrong, you're going to get told off. And it wasn't like that, certainly in the Sure Start Centre I used to go to. And it just seems to me that there's an awful lot in the world, actually, but in education in particular, where people think, well, these are natural behaviours, so we shouldn't need to pay for it. And I think things that got cut in austerity are things that, well, parents will parent, mums will mum, kids will grow, all of those things, they're natural things that occur. But you know me, I'm a firm believer in a bit of structure being very important to guide things. And it's just such a shame. And one of the things I read about it was that it could have had greater impact. Well, of course it could. I'm sure lots of things could have greater impact, but that's not a reason to not do anything at all. It's not an argument to stop. And so I found a bit of a strange argument there. So that's my thoughts.
Now, it's worth pointing out that obviously this is an economic, to close some of these programs was an economic or political decision. It wasn't one made across the whole of the UK. In Wales, for example, we still have what's called Flying Start centres, and those provide childcare for children under 4 from disadvantaged areas, enhanced health visiting services, access to parenting programs. and support for children to learn to talk and communicate, which we often hear about. Now, John, your thoughts on what we do with this information, I guess, as well now. You know, we've got this report. We all know where we are now. These centres or programmes don't exist in England as such anymore. What do we do with this information going forward then?
Well, we have to read it for what it says, which is on one hand something you would have expected. It is, as Shanika says, blindingly obvious that if you do good things very early on in those first, what they call the golden 1,000 days of a student's, of a young person's life, a baby's life, a family's life, if you give support to families at crucial times, it works in the long run. And that was one of the problems, I think, with Sure Start, is that was that it was a slow burn. And those that saw that report said, yes, we knew this was going to happen. It was going to take time. It would manifest itself over a lifetime of a student. And anyone who's realizes that you can go into a primary school and take test reading ages and say, well, I'll predict your GCSE results now, and you'll get an alarming level of accuracy 10 years later. So you realize that early start intervention is enormously useful. Yeah, I had a couple of problems. One was that it was a slow burn. The other was austerity, which, as you say, Nathan, was a political decision and an economic decision. And the other was that it came with a label attached to it, Labour's flagship. So the governments that came in, the Conservative government, was not best disposed to a thing that was hailed as one of the great successes of a Labour government. So what should we do now? Well, bring it back. It's just simple as that. I mean, this isn't the first report, by the way. The IFS did an earlier report a couple of years ago, which said that it had a good effect on health, on mental health. There were all sorts of economic reasons as well. Some early reports said it's not working as well as you might have thought, but it works. So my advice to Labour, if we are going to get a Labour government later in the year, do this. This works.
Thank you. And yeah, I think, we do sometimes, particularly at the moment, maybe, and we'll talk about some of these, we're looking for shortcuts in life. And that really takes us on to our next topic, book summary apps. So we've talked about the long burn of good reading at a very young age, and listening and talking skills, and how a Sure Start can help. We're going to look now a little bit about how us as adults now are all trying to take shortcuts to do it a little bit quicker. And this is a Guardian newspaper article about book summary apps. And with the tagline, I guess, that they are going to reduce critical thinking skills. There is some talk in the article about how this will impact on book sales, but the overwhelming kind of message is that we don't want to read whole books. We want to cut them down. And a quote from an author, Amy Liptrot, says, "These apps are very anti-literary. They're for people who want to absorb the ideas without reading the book. I don't mind a bland, soulless summary, but I do mind false quotations." So we're going to come to Shaniqua. You look for a quick summary rather than reading a whole book?
This is what we were talking about, what you mentioned, because sometimes I feel like I have a bit of a short attention span. And actually, I've noticed that there is a significant, I think a lot of people are starting to get, quite the short attention span, which is disappointing for me to say, because I love a book. And I think sometimes I look at book summaries myself, and as the author just said, I think they can be a useful starting point. They're a bit like movie trailers. It gets me interested, but it doesn't take away. And especially as a teacher, I know it doesn't take away from the real magic, the happiness of when you actually dive into the full experience of reading a book. And there is no actual substitute for reading an actual book. But there are some times that actually I can't be bothered to read the book, or I just feel like I don't have enough time, which also goes into how I feel about teaching, where I just feel like I don't have enough time to read this. I just want the main points. But it does take away from the absolute magic. And I feel so sad. That's why I push my students, because I'm like, I want them to enjoy a book. And actually, sometimes when I'm reading these summaries, I'm like, how accurate is this? Is this the actual plot? But I also think it's a good way of discovering books as well, because it is a bit of a discovery tool. You're likely, well, for me, if I'm reading it, the summary, I'm like, oh, I might read this. But it depends how in-depth the summary is. So I know, I think I'm a bit controversial here, because I can see the point of it, but also I definitely know it doesn't take away from reading an actual book, and I wouldn't promote it myself. But I know, generally talking about myself, I might go through a summary app.
Yes.
Now, to some extent, some of these issues have existed, in books into films. I've often had this kind of discussion with even Harry Potter, where I've been told that I'm missing some of the nuance, missing some of the extra details in the book when it's been condensed down into, what was that, 9-10 films. So, even some other books that are condensed down. His Dark Materials was made into an okay film, the first book, but it missed so much nuance there. And that's with fiction books. But of course, we're also talking about non-fiction books here, where we're supposed to be gaining, an understanding and an idea. What are your thoughts, Catherine?
I think there's two things going on. One is we do want to be efficient, and I'm terrible for, I want to find a summary so that I will, like, for example, I recently had to find out about sociological ideas about culture for my doctorate, and I haven't got time to really learn it. So I watched a couple of A-level revision videos so that I'd know where to then direct my focus, because I need to take a few shortcuts. And I listen to audiobooks in the car all the time. So I think, there's the sitting down and reading, which I don't sadly have much time to do. But I think like when I did my degree, they gave us a copy of Hobbes' Leviathan, which, if you haven't seen it, is chunky and dense. And they said, you're going to have to read part of this, and it's going to be hard, and you're going to hate it. But actually, they were really explicit, and they said, what you're learning to do is engage with a dense text, and afterwards you'll be very proud of yourself that you've done it. So I think there's things where you need to get to the information you need efficiently, and there's things where you're learning a skill by engaging with a dense text, which is different. And I think there's space for both. And I quite often say to my students, we have to read this part of the anthology. I could tell you what Kant says about this, but you need to be able to read a dense text. And so there's a dual purpose. And I think, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's time for both. I don't have a problem with it, as long as you do have the skills and the means of getting the skills as well.
Now, I'm going to come on to John. There's two different ways of looking at this. Is this the world moving on, technology helping us, or is it part of us losing our attention span, as possibly Shaniqua suggested there? Are we all off to watch a TikTok on War and Peace and think we understand it? What are your thoughts?
I would be delighted if we lived in a world where large numbers of people, most students have ever taught, were dipping into a broad range of things, even superficially, even if they were getting it a bit wrong. That would be great. I'm a complete enthusiast for the idea that we are overwhelmed by information, and you have to be selective and you have to be efficient in your appreciation of it. That's the way I understand the world. I have a feeling it's the way we understand the world generally. I think even if you've read Leviathan from cover to cover, and you think I understand it, I really get it, some years later you'll understand it, and your brain will have processed it into some sort of summary of your own. That's the way we understand the world, in short summaries, appreciation of things in bullet points. Probably that would be delightful. I think our problem today isn't that people are understanding incomplete and incomplete understandings of big things. What they're having is they're de-learning things. In other words, people have an incomplete learning of not much. And so I would much prefer it if we could encourage people to have broad understandings of lots of things. That's what I am. I know little about lots. And that is, I think, not a bad way to approach the world. And occasionally, and taking Shaniqua's absolutely clear point, yes, when you go into a novel and you read it and you immerse yourself in literature, that's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I don't think it'll take away from that. I think it's an augmentation, and that's what we'll have to do. For instance, there was one thing that was quoted in the article in The Guardian. Someone said, well, these days people use sat-navs and they don't know their way around places. Well, I never knew my way around places anyway. So without a sat-nav, I just get lost. So sat-navs are brilliant. And I think they've taken away all that leafing through the A to Z in the middle of London somewhere in heavy traffic. It's great. Use them by all means, but be aware of what they are.
So hopefully saving some time there. We've got some messages coming through, about a big shift, maybe for if you're undergraduate level studying, the depth that you're looking for. John suggesting that, maybe for cultural learning, which some of these apps seem to be, they seem to be ones that are targeted at things like knowing a little bit about a lot of things, being maybe in the article, it talks about being able to chat about something around the water cooler at work, having, seeming literary without maybe having read it all. And that kind of what I guess we used to term cultural capital, knowing a little bit, even if you don't know it, you've heard of some of these big books. I guess, do we put it in the category with AI as it's going, though, where it is kind of a little bit like cheating? So Shaniqua, are you feeling that this verges towards something that we would discourage of children or something that you would encourage of children, dipping into these book apps where they're getting a brief summary of maybe a bigger work?
Oh, I feel like as a teacher I should be saying discouraging, but also I think, especially listening to everyone here, there's so much to do, and especially I don't teach secondary, and with GCSEs and A-levels and the amount that you have to fit in within that small amount of time, and also just to get children engaged, I think, I understand if children were to use them, but as we've said, it doesn't take away from the experience. And, as Catherine and John has said, you do have to do the reading. Sometimes you have to do the reading, but I think, if it can help, yes, but, oh, you put me on the spot there, Nathan. Yeah, I don't know.
And
Yeah.
Catherine, I'm going to come to you. Should we be maybe attaching a little sentence to ourselves then when we talk about things? If someone says, yes, have you read War and Peace? I can say, well, I've heard of it. I've read a summary. I've watched the film. Are we going to have to start doing that in future rather than claiming credit for maybe ideas we haven't fully understood?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, because that puts you in the context of talking to someone who has actually read War and Peace. If we're all faking it. So, yeah, I think we just need to be upfront. I mean, I didn't get into hot water the other day, but some of my students were a bit wide-eyed because I said that I'd used some AI to help with some marking, because it basically writes better comments than I do. So I gave it my notes and it spat out some nice comments. And, before I knew it, the deputy head had pulled me aside at break and said, Year 12 said you marked their work with AI. And I was like, well, I kind of did. But it's one of those things. I think as long as we are honest about what's going on, I don't know that you need to signpost it so explicitly, but, yeah, I don't think it's a problem. I think there's balance, and I think you shouldn't be hiding it. If you're hiding it, there's probably a problem.
And John, you've kind of, I think, answered some of this for us in your answer already. But I guess the question is then, we're saying, is it better to be broadly read or deeply read, I guess?
I'd say, you've put me in a possible one there, but a bit of both, obviously. But I would say broadly read is good. And be deeply read by all means, but broadly read is good. What worries me is an awful lot of if you look at the voting behaviour in our society, it used to be based on class. I'll deep into politics here, and now it seems to be differentiated far more by education. So we have a considerable group of people in the population who will move into silos of understanding that are narrow and de-learned, and that's the problem, not this one. I would love it if lots of people said, well, I know a bit about War and Peace, not the full thing, but I can express a view on it. I can express a view on all sorts of things. I could tell you I could actually tell you, and so that you actually believed I knew something about quantum physics. I could, and you'd be convinced I knew something. And as long as we didn't go too far, as long as I never met a quantum physicist, I'd be just fine. And I'm very proud of that knowledge.
There we go. So our advice there is stay away from John at dinner parties,
yes,
and functions. We've got a message there coming in just saying, do book summaries help with conceptual as opposed to sequential learners? I think, I have to say, and this is my piece before we move on to our next story, is I do read summaries of things, and I read summaries of films, particularly if I never get to the end of it. I will go onto Wikipedia or other such places, and I'll find out what happened at the end of the film because I missed it, because I fell asleep, because I was too tired, because I can't leave it unfinished. And if I don't have enough time, I have to know the ending. So I will double check, and I will use a summary app for that, just to kind of, I guess, tie a knot in the end of the journey and the story for me. But that's strictly fiction. Now we are heading on to our last story. And just before we do, I want to say a special thank you to someone who has helped us keep these shows coming, which is Teach Well Toolkit. Teach Well Toolkit is a multi-award-winning company equipping schools and communities to build a culture of staff and pupil mental health. They're DFE-approved provider of senior mental health lead program and have trained over 100 schools to date. Feedback has highlighted how beneficial the schools have found the training and commented on how well Teach Well Toolkit understands the mental health challenges faced by staff. Teach Well Toolkit was founded by school leaders, Steve Waters and Sunita Bagri. Sunita and Steve are qualified mental health first aid instructors and mindfulness teachers, and they have an impressive portfolio of skills to support school staff, including counselling, coaching, supervision, and mediation. By signing up to Teach Well Toolkit's senior mental health lead training, you'll have access to a fully resourced, unique program which will support you and every step of the way in your role as senior mental health lead in your school. And of course, you may well be able to catch up on Listen Back to a show that they did recently with Tom Rogers, and we'll maybe direct you to that before the end of the show. Now, back to our stories. This one, well, we sometimes come to a possibly funny one. I guess we'll see how funny we all find this at the end. But the Scouts, it has been suggested, will be should learn some teaching skills. This is from a Schools Week article. Scouts will develop teaching skills as part of attaining badges under a new government scheme to boost the teaching pipeline. Now, I think it's that bit that we maybe will focus on here, because I don't think anyone has an issue with some young people learning some skills. But Shaniqua, Scouts as a pipeline into teachers, what's your thoughts? Were you a guide, a Scout yourself?
I was a Girl Guide myself. So I really was like, oh, this is interesting. And growing up, I always wanted to be a teacher. So actually, when I read this, I was like, oh, I would have loved this as a child, especially as a Girl Guide. Like, I think, although that's the other thing, teaching is one career. Everyone does know, though. Everyone has a teacher. But I think for those who want to be a teacher, it'd be really exciting. And I don't think it's a solution to the current problems, but I liked the idea of getting even more children to fall in love with the joy of teaching, because at the moment, that is not there, and planting that seed for the future. But then again, and this is the other part, if this profession was truly valued, if it was truly valued and education and funding was in the right way, there'd be no need to boost anything. The teaching profession is currently crumbling. I mean, look at what our old NEU General Sec just said, where she said, it's frankly bizarre. Teaching profession is burning. And I just think the causes are well known. They are well known. We know what is the problem at the moment. These badges, these Scout badges are not going to sort out the burnout from teachers. Teachers are leaving regardless. So it's great to get children enthusiastic and wanting to be teachers, but then they'll train to become teachers and leave. So I can see the pros and the cons. And a little Girl Guide, young me, would have loved this, but then I would have become the teacher I am today. And here we are. I'm watching my peers around me leaving this profession. So sad at the same time. Weird.
Now, I will say, I was a beaver, I was a cub, I was a Scout. I used it, and I did sports coaching through that, and leadership things, and imparting information. There were presentations. All of these things existed. It wasn't necessarily defined as teaching, as some people might see it in the classroom, but certainly the skills of imparting knowledge and information and skills to other people was already part of it. So there's the question of, is learning teaching skills a good thing for young people, but also this tail end of the message here, which is that it's going to increase people wanting to go into teachers. We already have 2 people from this organisation, myself and Shaniqua, who ended up in teaching anyway. Are there really that many more who this is going to recruit to solve a recruitment crisis? Catherine, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was also a Girl Guide, and one of the things that I would say about this is that when you're going to become a teacher, one of the things you have to do, or you used to have to do, you have to go and spend some time in a primary school. I did that for a week before I went to do my secondary PGCE. I also had to demonstrate that I'd worked with children before applying for my PGCE, and I did that at a Girl Guide unit. And I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity for those organizations to feed into this profession. I don't think that's problematic or controversial, but it's this idea that this is somehow a brilliant idea, that's some kind of flagship policy, that's strange. And I can't disagree with anything Shaniqua said, because clearly it brings some skills forth in young people that benefit them later in life, and that's a fantastic thing. But this shouldn't be, this isn't going to solve the problem. It's cute, thank you, lovely, but it's not groundbreaking.
And John, I'm just making a note here of the different groups of people we've previously heard we're going to target to solve the teaching. There's been top graduates we've targeted. We of course at one point were targeting the army. They were going to solve our teacher recruitment crisis. I'm trying to remember if there's anyone else who we thought could save the teacher recruitment crisis in an announcement like this. What are your thoughts?
Well, it does carry an air of desperation about it. This, you're right. There is a sense in which, as you say, Nathan, who else can we identify? And also a little bit of selective. The army, the scouts. There's something. These people are all in uniform. There's some sort of obsession here with the idea that people who can, build campfires or something or people who can live in the wild will deal with a difficult class. I'm imagining some staff room of the future with someone with a we coming into the staff saying, my year 9s are out of control, and someone steps forward and says, don't worry, I have a scouting badge. I shall take charge of them now. And a few minutes later, they're all whittling and building small fires and things. But it is, I think, underlyingly desperation, but also a prejudice towards the idea that what we really need in education is people with practical skills and a bit of discipline and so on. It's the idea really that it's not really a learned profession. It's just a sort of craft, like whittling and like building tents. It's a sort of craft, and we could all become good teachers if we just got the practical skills in place. We need to raise the idea of teaching as something akin to being a lawyer or being a doctor. It's a profession. It's complicated. It's skillful. It's not something you're just going to pick up at 11 years old and go, oh, I know the basics. I've got the three, smile and whistle, and you'll be a good teacher. I think it's daft.
And I will finish that story off with saying, a lot of skills I learned from the Scouts, but I don't think many of them I use in the day-to-day classroom anymore. Slinging up a bowline shelter and all of these things. My whittling, as you say, John, has not really helped me get anyone through a GCSE at present. You never know. Maybe with the T levels, maybe we'll see some of those skills come back. Who knows? Right, we are going to wrap.
If called upon, Nathan, if called upon, you could.
If called upon, I could. If I needed to, if there was an emergency situation where some whittling was needed, then I would be the man to call. But my issue with this as a story, as always, is, as you say, that there seems to be a certain cliche that we're looking for when we're doing these things. Slightly rigid, slightly formal, slightly middle class, can I say? kind of ideals that we're going for, that kind of sit nicely and make a nice sound bite. But yeah, more than a sound bite, I don't think so. Right, we're going to wrap things up with our shows of the week. We're going to come round. Shaniqua first. What's caught your ear this week on Teachers Talk Radio?
What caught my ear was Emily Edwards' show, and it was all about her favourite and everyone's favourite fictional teachers, which I always find interesting. On my old Teachers Talk Radio shows, I always ended with favourite fictional teachers, so it was really nice to hear about that. And I think it's the holidays, and also just as we were talking about, there's so much to do with teaching at the moment. So to hear her discuss what makes some of these favourite fictional teachers so good, it's a really nice little listen. So I do recommend that. And
Catherine, your show of the week?
Oh, Shaniqua, sorry. Shaniqua, who was yours?
Can you come back to me at the end? I have to change it now. It's changed. Sorry.
Catherine, your show of the week.
I really liked Darren Lester's show yesterday morning, which was toxicity in the workplace, and he really broke down and he used sort of an analogy to bullying and how it's not one-off poor choices or bite backs when people are stressed. It's a pattern of behavior over time, and he gave some really practical tips about how you can deal with that and how you can recognize it and be a bit reflective to see if perhaps you are displaying some unhelpful and unhealthy behaviors as well. And I just thought it really cracked open the conversation about toxic behaviors, which is a word that gets bandied about an awful lot. So I thought it was really interesting and well worth a listen, just to understand how it can happen and what you can do about it if you feel like it's happening to you.
Very important message there, I think, for a lot of us in education at the moment, sadly. John, your show of the week.
It was the Late Show earlier in the week with Tom and Hannah. They interviewed the founders of Teach Well Toolkit, Steve and Sunetta. It was actually, I advise anyone to listen to this, really, because all the way through my teaching career, I saw examples of teachers with breakdowns, with clear mental health problems, and it's something that we don't talk about enough, and it relates well to the show Catherine listened to on toxic classrooms and toxic behaviors and so on. A lot of our schools, because of the surveillance culture, have become toxic. And this was a practical, insightful guide, I thought, to ways we can create positive environments. And we can say positive environments, and it becomes a tick box exercise. But in reality, it takes a bit of work and a bit of thought and a bit of complexity. It's a great show.
And my show of the week was same as Shaniqua. It was Emily Edwards' Fictional Teachers. I think a fictional teacher, your favourite fictional teacher, can tell you a lot about the teacher and who they want to be. So we are going to finish with Shaniqua on the spot, as John has asked.
Sorry.
And we will read into this as much as we want now. After the show, everyone will be able to unpick what this means about her. But your favourite fictional teacher was?
Oh, mine. Professor McGonagall from Harry Potter. Oh, okay. There's some nods. So that's great. It's not Miss Honey. It's Professor McGonagall. Just because she was very supportive. And yeah, I just thought she was a great teacher. And guys, I actually read that. It wasn't on a book summary app. I read the books. Great teacher. There you go.
Like, I've seen the film. I'll have to get the gist of it from there, I'm afraid.
Wikipedia
I'll Wikipedia it afterwards. Now, thank you to Shaniqua, Catherine and John this week. We'll see you all next week, or if you're listening in live through the week, enjoy the sunshine. Spring has sprung. See you later, everyone.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused